Welcome back friends to the class number 36. In the today's video we will discuss the concept of NWC, that is net working capital. It is a very important concept whenever you want to understand the working capital management or whenever you want to understand the working capital credit underwriting, right? So what is net working capital? We call it NWC in a shorter form. If we talk about the formula, the net working capital is simply the difference between the total current assets and total current liabilities. Total current assets minus total current liabilities is equal to your NWC, net working capital. So the total of current assets, if we do only the total of current assets, that is often called gross working capital. Gross working capital. And when we deduct the total current liabilities from it, then it is called the net working capital. So this is the difference between gross working capital and net working capital. You already know, when we talk about total current assets, then what does they represent? They represent the investments done by us which are recoverable in the next 12 months period. Which are recoverable means these are good assets which are we are very hopeful that they will give us recovery in next 12 months. They are not obsolete or any dead type of assets. And what are the current liabilities? These are the amount payables in the next 12-month period. Amount payable in the next 12-month period. Now, in this video, it is very important for us to understand what does NWC tells us. What is its actual meaning, which is relevant for us in understanding the whole working capital concept. So, I have explained 2-3 points here to understand the NWC meaning. Point number 1. What is this? How much current assets are funded by the current liabilities? That picture gets cleared from NWC. How much current assets are funded by the current liabilities? Suppose your current assets are 50 rupees and your current liabilities are 40 rupees. So which would mean that around 80% of your current assets, which means 80% of your investments, 80% of your investments are financed by the short term sources. Financed by the short term sources means current liabilities, right? If we make a summarized balance sheet here, if your total current assets are 50 rupees, the current liabilities, current assets are 50 rupees, current liabilities are 40 rupees, right? So that means the rest of your current assets, are financed by non-current liabilities, means long-term sources, right? You know the total of balance sheet always tallies with each other. Suppose the non-current assets are nil, which is unlikely in many businesses. Suppose non-current assets are nil and current assets are rupees 50, current liabilities are rupees 40, then what is the balance left? 10 rupees in non-current liability side, right? So that means these 50 rupees are 80% financed by the current liabilities and 20% financed by the long-term sources. So this would further mean rupees 10, in other words 20% of the short-term assets, current assets, are funded from the long-term sources. And you know very well guys, these long-term sources can be the promoter's own funds, can be the funds taken for long-term purpose from outside market or outside people as well, right? So long-term sources can be in form of promoter's own equity or quasi-equity or from outside market as well, right? So that means these long-term sources can be the promoter's own funds also and can be the outsiders funds also. When we talk about the positive NWC, like in this example, the NWC is positive by rupees 10. Rupees 10 is the positive balance. That means NWC is positive by rupees 10. Many people gets confused by the fact that if the NWC is positive, that means 10 rupees is invested here in current assets from long-term sources. That is the only crux of NWC. The difference here of 10 rupees represents these 10 rupees are financed by the long-term sources, right? So many people get confused that these 10 rupees, the difference, positive difference in NWC represents that this money is funded by the promoter's capital or the owner's equity, right? Which is a wrong interpretation, because these 10 rupees represents only the long-term sources which are invested in the current assets, and these long-term sources can be the own funds and can be the borrowed funds also, right? So positive NWC doesn't mean promoter margin contribution. Let it be very clear to you. It doesn't mean that the promoters have contributed in current assets, right? So because the long-term sources can be from the outside market also, outsiders also, right? So, but one thing is clear: more the NWC, more the difference between the current assets and current liabilities, which would mean the more long-term sources are invested in your current assets. So suppose if the current assets are rupees 60 and current liabilities are rupees 40 and the difference come of rupees 20, that means these 20 rupees will represent the funds invested, the current assets financed from the long-term sources. So the more the NWC, the more funds are infused by the non-current liability holders in the business, right? So this was the point number one. Now we come to point number two. Higher the NWC, higher the working capital requirement. Higher the NWC, higher the working capital requirement. Why? The difference between current assets and current liabilities is rupees 10, right? So current asset represents your 50 rupees investment. Current liabilities represent 40 rupees finance source, 40 rupees of source that you have got from your current liability holders, right? So that means these rupees 10 have been stuck up in the current assets, which could have been used elsewhere for growth of business. Current assets do not contribute in expansion, in growth of the business. They only manage the current working capital cycle of the business, right? So these are the total funds and investments, and these rupees 10 represents the long-term funds infusion in the current assets, right? These long-term funds which are choked up in current assets could have been used to finance the non-current assets as well, right? Which would have helped in business in growing and expanding further, right? So that is why the more the NWC, which would mean the more long-term sources are invested in short-term investments, which should have been used for creating non-current assets more, right? Since you cannot use these funds to create the non-current assets, as we have already studied. So the long-term funds which could have been used elsewhere is stuck up here. So the more you have NWC, the more the funds are stuck up in there. That means the more there is a need for you to get the working capital finance from the bank, so that you can free up these long-term funds and invest them in creating long-term assets, right? Now the last point is the point number 3. What does negative NWC represents? What does the negative NWC represents? It represents your fund mismanagement. We have already discussed it in the previous video itself. If the current assets and current liabilities, if the current assets are rupees 40 and current liabilities are rupees 50, what would that mean? That would mean if we take this example, current liabilities are rupees 50, current assets are rupees 40, right? So suppose these are nil. So that would mean your current liability, the funds you are expected to pay back in next 12 months period, 10 rupees out of it have been invested in long-term assets, which will not pay you back in next 12 months period. That means you have mismanaged your short-term funds in long-term assets. So the negative NWC will represent the picture that your short-term funds have been invested in long-term assets, right? So funds invested in non-current assets, negative NWC will represent this, and this represents your total mismanagement of funds in the business, right? So guys, this is not a thumb rule. Many business work on negative NWC as well. It totally depends on the business model, the equity you have in the market, the goodwill you have in the market, the command you have, the bargaining power you have in the market. Many businesses like Walmart operate on such cycles only, right? But for MSME sectors, particularly in India, this is a negative position for your business, right? I hope I have made my points clear to you. We will meet you in the next video. Thank you very much.